Hello and welcome to this lesson where we're going to begin to use integer variables and do very basic arithmetic with them. And by arithmetic, I mean addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And I'm trying to outline here what the different symbols are. They're very simple. To add things together, you use a plus sign. To subtract them, you use a minus sign, which is the key just to the left of your equal sign on the keyboard. Multiplication is an asterisk, and division is a forward slanted slash. So this is not a backslash, this is a regular slash. So these are going to be the operators we're going to use. There are other operators in Java that you may have occasion to use, but by far add, subtract, multiply, divide are the ones you're going to use all the time. So in order to illustrate how to deal with that, first let's initialize or declare several variables. So let's call one variable num1 for number 1, and let's actually make these integers num1, num2, num3, num4, and we'll put a semicolon. Now I could have put all four of these variables on separate lines, so int num1, semicolon, int num2, semicolon, and so on. It's just a different style. I'm going to do it this way, and you can do it the other way. It's totally fine either way. So here I have four integers, and as we said before, integers represent whole numbers. That's really all they can store, so negative and positive whole numbers. So for now, let's assign to num1 the value of 10. Let's assign to num2 the value of 3. To number 3, let's assign the value of 5. And to number 4, let's assign the value of 2. Now, if you forget a semicolon in this case, you see Eclipse is trying to warn you that you have a problem here. But if you try to run this guy, it's going to tell you there's an error here. And so that's what you need to kind of be aware of. Semicolons pretty much go after almost anything. You don't put them after the methods. You don't put them after a few other things we'll talk about later in terms of loops and so on. But almost every other statement in Java is going to have a semicolon at the end. So now we have created, or I should say we have declared and initialized four separate numbers that are integers. Alright, so now that we have the four variables there, we want to start doing some math. So let's create another variable called sum, right, where we're going to add some things together. And just to make it easy at first, we'll say number 1, or let's say the variable sum is equal to number 1 plus 5. So all we're doing is taking the value of variable 1, which is 10 in this case, and we're going to add 5 to it, and we're taking this guy and we're assigning the result of it to the variable that we have called sum. So we know that it should be equal to 15. Let's check out and see what it is. So in order to print things on the screen, we turn to our trusty println method. And so let's put our quote in there, and we'll say num1 plus 5 equals, put a space, put a plus here, and we'll say sum. Now make sure you understand what's going on. This is just text. It's going to print out num1 plus 5 equals, and then it's going to print the value of the sum, which we've already calculated up here. So let me go ahead and save this and run it. Num1, which is the variable, plus 5 is equal to 15. The reason it's equal to 15 is because we've made the calculation here, stored it in a new variable, and now we're printing the results of that variable. So you see, add, subtract, multiply, divide becomes a fairly trivial thing here. Let me go ahead and create another variable, so we can just sneak right into here and put difference like that. That's another integer variable named difference. So I'll say difference is equal to, let's take the number 3 variable and let's subtract from it the number 2 variable. So here, in the first case, we were just adding a constant number. Here we're taking two different variables and we're subtracting them. The number 3 variable minus the number 2 variable. Right? So 5 minus 3 is 2, and that result is going to be assigned into a new variable that we're calling difference. So let's go down here in a new line, and we'll say system.out.println. We'll come up over here, and we'll say num3 minus num2, which is what we're doing, is equal to, and then we'll put a plus sign saying, hey, here comes a variable difference. Right, we have a semicolon at the end. So here's text, num3 minus num2 equals, and then we print the difference there. Right, num3 minus num2, we should get a 2. Num3 minus num2 is equal to 2. And notice that we have these printed out on two separate lines. We have the first guy, then we have a line feed. We're going into the second one there because we're using the function println. So after every statement that's printed, we get a free carriage return to the next line. I want to take this moment just to introduce to you or show you that we use the print line function a lot because we get a free carriage return, but there actually is just a regular old print function in Java, and that's going to print everything exactly the same except that you don't get that line feed. So if we save it again and we use the regular print function, notice what's happening. Num1 plus 5 is 15. There's no space, there's no carriage return, and it slides right into the next print statement because when we use this function, we did not get a free carriage return there. Now, as we mentioned before, you can always force a carriage return by putting a /n into your quotation. Actually, we don't want it there. If we do it at all, we want to print it after the variable. So what we would do is we'd put /n like that, and then it would force a carriage return, and we'll get back exactly what we started with before. You don't use that regular print function too often, but I just wanted to make you aware that it's there. So for the most part, we're going to use println there. All right, now moving right along, we want to create some more variables. Let's create product, or let's say multiply, and let's create divide. Two new variables, both integers. All right, and let's go after these guys. So now we've done these calculations, we've printed this stuff out. We can go down below this stuff, that's fine. You don't have to have all of your math up at the top. You can go down below. We can say multiply is equal to, let's say, num3 times num4, right? Num3 times num4, and then we can say system.out.println. I want to show you something else while I'm at it. When you're using this println command here, if you just want to get a free carriage return to give you some space between output, you can just include it here with nothing inside at all, and you'll get a free carriage return there. So we can actually copy this. This is a cheap way of just getting a couple of blank lines like this. And on the third one, we could say something like, let's see here, what are we doing? Num3 times num4. So we could say num3 times num4, right? And then after this, we put a plus sign, and we're going to call this the multiply variable. So notice what we're doing here. We do some math. We're saying num3 times num4. We store it in the variable called multiply. We give ourselves two extra blank lines on top of the one that we get from the carriage return from this statement, and then we print out num3 times num4 is equal to whatever we get here. So num3 times num4 should be 5 times 2, which is 10. So we go ahead and hit save, and we run that guy. Num3 times num4 is 10. So 5 times 2 is 10. Notice we get a few blank lines in here. One of the blank lines is from this println statement. The other ones are coming from the empty blank println. So when you just want a quick blank line, you can just put these functions in with nothing in there at all, and you'll skip down. I'm trying to show you random little things that are useful as we go through here. The last thing I want to show you is we've declared a variable called divide up here. So actually, let's just go down below here. So divide is equal to, let's do num1 divided by, that's the slash, num4. Okay, num1 is 10, num4 is 2, so when you divide them you get 5, so that's going to work fine. Okay, and let's go system.out.println. And what we'll do is we'll put our quotes in here, and we will say num1 divided by num4 is equal to, and we're going to put a plus sign to tell it to put the value of what we've calculated, which is the variable that we've called divide. So we're saying this divided by this is equal to divide. Let's see what it prints out, and let's click run here, and we have 10 divided by 2 gives us 5. So num1 divided by num4 is 5. Now that's all correct. Now I want to show you something. Notice that 10 is a whole number. 2 is a whole number. So when we divide them, we get 5, which is a whole number. Now what if we change this a little bit? So instead of dividing by num4, we do 10 divided by 3. We know that that's not going to give us a whole number answer. So let's change this and say num1 divided by num2. And we'll say change this to print that out properly. What do you think is going to happen when we try to take 10 and divide it by 3? Well, let's find out. Let's go ahead and hit enter here. And we're going to get an answer of num1 divided by num2. It gives us 3. So 10 divided by 3 is not exactly 3. 3 times 3 is 9. So that's not exactly quite right. But we're dealing with integers here. The variable that we call divide is an integer. It can only represent whole numbers. So if you try to divide things and you get decimal points, they're going to be lost as we work on this. So just kind of keep that in mind. When you're choosing integer variables, you pretty much need to know ahead of time that they are going to represent whole numbers and nothing else, including all of the calculations that we do. All right, so let me go ahead and give myself a few little blank lines here. So let me go ahead and put, well, we can do it a couple different ways, but let's put a plus sign and let's go \n \n. That's going to give me 2 free spaces down. Now let's do one more thing. Let's do a print statement, system out print ln, like this, and we'll say num1 is equal to num1. So I'm printing out the value of number 1 right here. And I have a typo. It's not system.out, it's system.out. So let me go ahead and hit this guy and run it. So I'm just printing out the value of variable 1, or number 1, which is 10. Now after I've printed that, let me change the value of variable 1. So in all of these other cases, we have a variable called sum, a variable called difference, multiply, and divide, and we've assigned values into them. Now let's change the value of the variable number 1. So we'll say number 1 is equal to, let's see, number 1 is equal to number 1 times 6. So what we're doing is we're saying take the variable number 1, multiply it by 6, and whatever you get, put it back into the variable number 1. So we're overwriting the value of number 1. So now if we do system.out, print ln, like this, then we'll say new value of num1 is equal to num1. So let me go ahead and change this one up here. Original value of num1. So let me go ahead and hit this guy, and then we will go over here. So the original value of number 1 is 10. The new value of number 1 is 60 because we've multiplied by 6. Notice in both cases I'm outputting the value of number 1 through the print statement. But because I'm overwriting it, of course a new value gets printed. So that's enough for this lesson. Basically you can add, subtract, multiply, and divide variables. You can add or subtract or multiply and divide by actual numbers in your code. You can do those operations between variables and assign them into new variables. You can use all the print statements to print them out. You can overwrite the value of a variable and basically update it with a new revised value. And you can actually get blank lines if you want to give yourself some space by putting these blank print ln statements there. And then finally we also told you that there is another function called print where you don't get that free carriage return at the end. So make sure you understand all of this stuff, and then follow me on to the examples where you can practice your skills.